Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, Happy New Year. It's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We are glad to have you with us. In this episode, we're going to review the quarterfinal games, Fiesta Peach, Rose, and Sugar. We're recording less than an hour after the latter wrapped up in the Superdome. It was obviously pushed back a day because of that awful attack in New Orleans. At least 14 dead and 3 dozen injured. Our thoughts, our hearts are with those that were affected by it. There's so much more to life than football. And this was a kind of reminder that no one wants to see. But I just want to say New Orleans is a wonderful city. I've been there many times, both leisure, before and after Katrina, and to cover college football from the Sun Belt Media Days to the 2020 National Championship game. It's a resilient city. I still plan to take my own kids there this year, actually. So that's all I wanted to say about that. I don't want to make this too dark. But, yeah, all that said, though, I am so looking forward to talking about these quarterfinals. Again, we're still kind of getting off the buzz of the Sugar Bowl, actually, what actually occurred in the game. Sean, how are you doing? Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year. So are we blowing up the system now? Is it broken now? I know that it was a travesty, obviously, that Indiana was allowed to play in the college football playoff because they lost by 10 points against Notre Dame in a road game. I don't know exactly how a 13-point loss to Notre Dame in a neutral site. I don't know exactly how those translate. I assume it must be great for some reason. I don't know. I can't keep up with this stuff. But no,
let's hear it for those Sun Devils who so many people were thought like, why does the number 12 team deserve the 4 seed? They're the ones that actually showed up, and it turns out the Ducks were the teams that seem to not really make the sale of the automatic bid being the reason you should go as a conference champ.
Well, I'll say too, right? So obviously the first round had blowouts. We knew that was possible. We knew that it was on the table that some of these teams that made the field were not going to be up to par with some of the other teams. But this is part of why this new system is so awesome, is because we didn't necessarily know which teams that would happen to. And you look at the number 1 team and number 1 seed in the field, the Oregon Ducks, who were undefeated, 13-0, Big Ten champions, had a head-to-head victory over Ohio State earlier this season. They lost by 20 points in the Rose Bowl. Like 20 points. And then you look at Georgia in the game that we're recording right after, by the way, the Sugar Bowl on Thursday evening. Like, they were the 2 seed, number 2 team in the college football playoff, SEC champions. They beat Texas twice along the way to get there. And they lost by 2 scores against a Notre Dame team that was viewed as the 3rd at large into the field, behind the Texas team that Georgia beat twice, behind Penn State. So, I think this is I think really exciting. The funny thing about, and the quirk about this bracket, is that all of the top 4 buys are out. The top 4 teams, the top 4 seeds are all out. The bottom 4 teams all out. 9, 10, 11, 12. We've got a semifinals that's only 5, 6, 7, and 8. And people, there definitely were people who what
we have to call them the Magnificent Mid. That's what we have to call them. They are the Magnificent Mid.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You should have seen Bubba. He just went flailing around on the I don't know what's going on. Well, I think that, again, people expected that the 5 seed would have a pretty favorable path because you'd be playing the last team in the field, the lowest conference champion, and you'd be playing the second worst conference champion, right? Like you get what could be the bottom 2 teams in the entire field, which it was this year, back to back. Texas got the number 16 team Clemson, the number 12 team Arizona State. They had a harder time than anybody else in their 2 games to this point. Like, all of the other teams were actually the ones who took care of business. Texas got pulled into some chaos. Look, I obviously hope that you're not learning about the results of games from this podcast, but if you haven't heard as yet, Texas plays Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. And let's start with this game. It's the 5 seed versus the 4 seed, and they go up 24-8 with only 6.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And then Cam Skattebo happens. And Cam Skattebo throws a 42-yard touchdown on a 4th and 2 trick play. That, by the way, I don't know if you saw the interview that happened this morning. Apparently, Cam Skattebo was supposed to do a throwback to the quarterback. But before the play, Sam Levitt, the Arizona State quarterback, said, hey, I rolled my ankle a little bit on the play before. Like, I don't know if I can make that run very well. So Cam Skattebo says, screw it, throws a bomb to a receiver downfield, 30 plus yards through the air for a running back. That goes for a touchdown, the first touchdown of the day for Arizona State. When that happens, the floodgates are opened. They end up going down the field, get the touchdown, get the 2-point conversion, force overtime. They ultimately lose in double overtime behind some. I will say too, he deserves a lot of credit because he's gotten so much crap. Quinn Ewers had 2 perfect touchdown passes in the final minutes, along with a 2-point conversion in the second overtime that ultimately decided a 39-31 win. So you want to complain about anything from Texas, it should not be the quarterback play in that game. They couldn't run the ball at all. I think that's something that's really concerning if you start to look forward, is the fact that Texas cannot run the ball unless Clemson is on the other side of the field. But, again, their passing game was good. Their defense was good. I think that, for me, Texas has been a top 2 defense in the country all year, along with Ohio State. I think they just got worn out in so many ways. They were on the field for so much of the game. Texas scores a touchdown on their first drive in 2 plays. They score a punt return touchdown on their second drive. They basically were on the field defensively the entire first quarter. And I think that you started to see that come through. You started to see Skattebo, you started to see Sam Levitt, you started to see Melquan Stovall, you started to see some of these playmakers, Troy O'Mary, just they just kept coming for Arizona State. And so, look, I think that both teams handled themselves very well at the end of it in that game. I think that it's really cool, frankly, that Cam Skattebo gets to leave this playoff as a college football folk hero. That's what we should be thrilled about, right? Forget the result. We should be thrilled that we'll get moments like that and performances like that from places that we don't expect. And Arizona State lost their only playoff game, but no one in Tempe is going to be at all upset about how the college football playoff went. I think this is how it's supposed to go. And, again, so credit to Arizona State for coming back. I think, Texas was the better team, I would say, on that day, but it also, I feel exposed some really serious holes that could be taken advantage of in the next round.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see the quarterfinal with the biggest spread end up being the closest one, the one that goes to overtime, the one that got everyone paying attention. I know folks who are getting ready to watch the Rose Bowl in the press box all tuned in. Their eyes were glued. I had someone in that press box and everyone was rapt. My goodness. And Cam Skattebo, he won the MVP of the game, rightfully so. He apparently puked, and he seems that he puked and rallied in the middle of the game, which is just hilarious. He became an absolute folk hero. For the entire Arizona State community. And again, shout out to those folks at Sacramento State who first identified him as a potentially good running back. He just absolutely tore that game apart. I know that you did some great writing about it yourself on CBSSports.com. And gosh, Quinn Ewers, again, I think you nailed it. To his credit, when the game was on the line, in those final few minutes, he came alive. You can say what you will. He picked up that 4th and 13 blitz and got that key touchdown when it seemed like Arizona State really had them on the ropes. He recognized it. He audibled, and they made that pass and got that touchdown and put them back in the game. It was something else. Once again, it felt like we saw a game, and we've seen this from Texas a few times, where they'll get close with another team, and then just the sheer talent that they have there, and that Sark has done a great job of putting together there, will step up and out push the other team. And that's what they did. And again, Arizona State tried their hardest. I think it's interesting too, and you could say the same thing about Boise State. and certainly the Oregon, the way they started the game, all three of those teams just seemed a little rusty. And the other team just jumped on them. And none of them could recover. As it turns out, none of the teams were ready for again, we'll probably talk about this again in our next episode, but that's an interesting question. Like, what do we talk about when we're talking about these buys? Are they even valuable? I know you were bullish on them, but I mean, 0 for 4 is pretty darn striking.
I get it. But like, I also feel like, I feel like some people are going to make too much of it is part of it. Like, because look at the context of the 4 games, right? 2 of them were heavy underdogs, right? Boise State, Arizona State were 2 touchdown underdogs. In another, you have a freshman quarterback who, by the way, played actually, or a first-year quarterback, not a freshman quarterback, who played really well in Gunnar Stockton. Like, he was actually probably the best player that they had on the team, at least on offense, during that game for Georgia. But, like, I don't know that they like found themselves later. Like, I think that they just had problems. And when you look at that Georgia game, it was a 54-second stretch that was in the middle of the game. I don't think that it was a slow start necessarily that killed them. And then again, like, maybe the one that you can point to is that Ohio State-Oregon game, where like if Ohio State doesn't have that get right game, then maybe it's different. But like 34 is a lot of points. 34 is hard to do by accident. I don't know that necessarily that Oregon in any circumstance was going to beat the Ohio State team that turned up that day. I mean, physically, mentally, like emotionally, it was just every single level of that game that Ohio State dominated. So I have actually been a little relieved that hasn't been the primary narrative coming out of this, that like, oh, well, the buys just aren't valuable. Because like, I think it's a little overstated and overrated. And by the way, the other thing I'll mention too, you want to talk about the real cost of not having a buy. We've actually seen it. Riley Mills, the defensive tackle for Notre Dame, out for the season because of what happened in the Indiana game. Abdul Carter has been dealing with injuries for the past 2 games for Penn State. Like, that's actually where you're going to feel the impact of this isn't in the first or second round. It's going to be getting to the 3rd or 4th round. And we'll get in the latter half of this episode to more looking forward to the actual games that are about to be played. But like, I think that injuries and having to play early might sway my pick in the Notre Dame Penn State game. Like I think that we might be in that circumstance. I picked Notre Dame to beat Georgia and make the national championship game, but like, they keep getting injured. Like the injuries are stacking up. And so I do think that, and it'll be evened out a little bit this year, just because all 4 of the teams that have made it through are teams that will have had to play 4 games to win a national championship. But I do think it's significant at the same time. And this is going to, especially in these final games, I think it is definitely going to turn into a battle of attrition. Mm-hmm. And the teams with the most depth, the teams with the most talent, like, I think that that's going to end up being a huge advantage. And by the way, that's also why I still have Ohio State winning the national championship.
I have to say, I just wanted to move, speaking of Ohio State, I wanted to move over to the Rose Bowl a little bit more. First of all, I am convinced somewhat Phil Knight, with all the money he's been throwing in Oregon, managed to buy a monkey's paw. And the wish was that we go undefeated in 2024. And they did. They went 14-0, starting with the Fiesta Bowl blowout of Liberty, all the way into the conference championship game. Unfortunately, they played on January 1st, 2025, because that is, I'm just still trying to come up with the mythical. I have to say, and I give a lot of credit to Dan Lanning, how honest and straightforward he is. His halftime interview was so great. He had this, like, he couldn't stifle a grin. It was almost like, what the hell am I supposed to say here? Like, y'all see it, I see it, And again, he was very honest with it. He's like, look, they clicked tonight, we didn't. I didn't get our team prepared. Because again, Oregon, it's got to be frustrating if you're an Oregon fan. There were no real missed calls, no bad penalties, no key injuries. The refs weren't out to get them. It's just, they got absolutely blown out of the water. And, my notes, when I was writing, I'm like, Shehan Jayaraja is right. Like, that's what I wrote, underlined it. Because this Ohio State team is terrifying. I mean, after the game, oh my gosh, he was just like, the quarterback was like, we played angry. And I'm like, yeah, I looked it. Like, oh my gosh, it's imagining like the legends. It's so weird too, because it's almost like if this keeps going the way it is, the pivotal moment in the entire story, which if you're writing a narrative, you couldn't ask for a better critical moment than that Michigan game. I mean, that is the pivotal moment, the flag plant. Like, that was the moment that galvanized them. Every now, they could have broken. I was skeptical. I fully admit it. I thought, if they get, in their own heads, they could lose to Tennessee at home and have that crowd go against them. And they resoundingly said no. It's like suddenly they just decided, instead of playing stupid, let's play smart. And wow, with all that talent, who knew?
Why did it take Ryan Day so long to read the message boards? Why didn't he just read the message board saying to throw it to Jeremiah Smith months ago?
Oh.
I do think that this was always part of my calculus of my pick for Ohio State to win the national championship, is that I think that Ohio State this season and under Ryan Day has been so in their head about the idea of beating Michigan their way. Like we can do it better than you. We don't have to do it our way. We can out physical you. We can run right at you. We do not care. We can beat you when you don't have to. Like you don't have to do that. You're the best roster in the entire country. You have the best receiving core in the country. You have a freshman wide receiver who, people are already, measuring him for his Hall of Fame jacket at the NFL level, right? Like you have one of the best freshmen who have ever played college football at wide receiver right now. And I figured going into the playoff, it's like, well, one, you don't have to go through the mental block of Michigan. And two, your back is against the wall. I fully believe it. If Ohio State lost to Tennessee, I'm not saying they would have fired him definitively, but I think there was a very good chance that he would not have been back next year. I think that's real. I think that pressure would have been resounding if you wasted this roster. And when you see the results, this is the reason why. Because this team is better than everybody. It's not even really that... it's harder for me to try to think of who the second best roster in college football is, because Ohio State is so far ahead of all of them. Maybe it's Oregon. Maybe it's Texas. I don't know. But nobody else right now, to me at least, is even close to the roster that they've run out there. Since they've made the playoffs, since they've lost to Michigan, like you mentioned, they've allowed themselves to just act like it. To act like we have the best roster in college football. We're going to perform like we do. And I'm not a football genius. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not scheming up ball plays. I'm not calling plays. But running Jeremiah Smith crossing routes seems like a pretty good idea. and Will Howard is darn good at timing those routes. And when those open up, your running game opens up, and it doesn't just have to be up the middle right at Mason Graham. It can also bounce outside. You can also run wide zone. You can also run outside zone. You're allowed to do these things. And this is the Ohio State team that we were promised. And I will ask you one question on this. So there have been years where you have a team like this that struggled during the regular season and maybe had multiple blemishes, but peaked at the right time, went into the postseason really strong. Do you think that it's a positive for the sport or a negative for the sport, the idea that a team can just make mistakes along the way and figure it out?
Oh, I think it's a positive. This is what people love about the NFL, teams that come together at the end when they need to. And that's what we're seeing. I was thinking this, again, we've mentioned it before, but in the old, they were ranked 6th before the seeding came out. They would have not been in the playoff in any of the previous iterations. This is a team that is peaking at the right possible time. Georgia kind of put their own underline of it last season when they went and just destroyed Florida State, without even missing a beat. They played that team as hard as they seemingly could. And now we saw in Ohio State, that team that was quite capable of doing that, except they're in the playoff and they're peaking and they're absolutely destroying everybody. And I love it. I actually think it's fantastic for the sport. I'm excited for it. And it has to make them feel a little bit better that they watched Michigan reach up from the grave and also pull Alabama down with them again.
That's got to help a little bit.
That makes it feel a little less stingy, I always wonder, did Ryan Day text, Kalen DeBoer afterwards? Been there, bro.
First time. No. And I think, so many people were complaining about the idea that, well, the regular season will just mean less if this happens. But first of all, you want to talk about the regular season meaning less. It's using efficiency metrics instead of actually counting the games. Ohio State dropped to the 8th seed because their regular season sucked. They had to play a tough path. If they win the national championship, which by the way is still up in the air. I want to be I feel like I'm talking like they've already won the damn thing, but they'll have had to beat Tennessee, which I don't really care about that. But Oregon, who's the 1 seed, they'll have to have beaten Texas, who's the 5 seed, and then you beat the winner of Penn State versus Notre Dame. That's a tough path. That's really hard. Even if you are one of the best teams in college football, winning all 4 of those games in a row is really hard. We saw it this year even with Georgia, who I don't think is necessarily the second best team in college football, but to be a 2 seed, they lost by 3 touchdowns against Ole Miss. But then they beat Tennessee by 2 touchdowns, but then they lose to Alabama, but then they get crushed by Notre Dame, but then they beat Texas twice. Even if you're really good, it's hard to win many good games in a row. So I do think that this has properly, quote unquote, punished teams for not showing up. And I think that one solid outcome of the SEC's total faceplant in the postseason this year, I think will be that I don't think we're going to get as many arguments for, well, you need to consider this 3-loss team. You have to put this 3-loss team in over this 1-loss team, because look at that grind. Oh my gosh, the grind is crazy. You would never understand what it turns out losing a bunch of games actually means that you're not as good and that you have some flaws and that you need to figure some stuff out, and not necessarily just, oh, well, it's just so hard. You don't understand how hard it is. You just don't get it. We have to do it here in the Southeastern Conference, and then you go and play Notre Dame and lose by 2 touchdowns.
I still can't get over the fact that Ohio State held the Ducks -23 rushing, now 8 sacks.
It's crazy.
A team that only had 13 all season.
And by the way, I will point out too, you mentioned that sacks factor into that. Sack adjusted, they average 1.6 yards per carry.
Yep. They only had 20 yards.
1.6 yards per carry. That's crazy.
Remarkable. And again, I felt bad for Dylan Gabriel because he also broke a record, or at least tied a record with Case Keenum, in the middle of the game. But it's all right, cool.
Lucky you.
Yeah, speaking of records, I felt bad for Ashton Genty because he didn't mean this, but it became billboard material for the Penn State defense, and they were talking about it after the game. They were like, we're not going to let him break Barry Sanders' record. And even then, that would have been a little weird because, again, there's so many extra games that are factored into this, but he didn't. He was 20-some yards short, I believe. And
26, I think.
28 yards short.
28.
Yeah, that's stuff. But my goodness. So Penn State, we said Penn State was built for, the playoffs were built for Penn State. The 12, and you know what? Give them credit. They've picked up the ball and at least gone 2 steps with it. I think at this point, and I'm not saying I'm picking them to lose, and we'll get to that game again a little later in the episode. I'm not picking them to lose that game. But at this point, Penn State, I feel like they're playing with the house money. They're in a great mood right now. And they keep looking happier every game they play because, frankly, they've just never been in the playoff before. But also, it's just, it's fantastic to see this. And it was also interesting, I talked about this before. Many have. Boise State, all the magic they'd had in the Fiesta Bowl. But somebody else pointed out Penn State is undefeated now in that game. They're 8-0 in the Fiesta Bowl. So it turns out they had a little bit more magic when it came to that game. But still, credit to Boise State. They brought it within 3 in the third quarter. But I just don't think they couldn't out-physical that team. And, I mean, we saw I just want to give another big credit. Penn State's defense. I mean, Abdul Carter lasted, a quarter and a change. He didn't make it the whole full half. And the rest of that defense stepped up and absolutely was just stifling for most of that game and really made it hard. And Tom Allen did a great job of planning that around stopping Genty and limiting his ability to break big runs.
Yeah, it was an impressive defensive performance. I will say, too, though, I think that you felt the loss of Abdul Carter when he went down. That's when you started to see Boise State have some success. And I think it's a huge testament to just how good Abdul Carter is that you felt him. And it wasn't just in his numbers. It wasn't just tackles or sacks. He's just present every single play when he's on the field. And you have to adjust for him being out when you're Penn State, when he did go out. So I certainly hope that he's healthy for the game against Notre Dame, because that's going to be a tremendous battle against a great offensive line. And I will say too, I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast probably has such a terrible take, but like the people coming away from that game saying like, oh, well, it turns out that Ashton Jeanty couldn't do it against power conference competition. Like,
give me a break.
You need to get your head examined. Like you need to watch ball literally ever. This was not just a player taking. I'm not even going to get into this because it's so ridiculous, the idea. I mean, there was that 10-yard run near the end of the game where he broke like 6 tackles on one run, which was one of the craziest slow-mos I've seen in a long, long time. And it was crazy. I think that, look, he's going to go on and have a very successful career at the next level. But this is always a struggle if you are a Group of 5 team, is just whether your trenches can keep up for 4 quarters. Some teams can do it for 1 or 2 quarters, but to do it over the course of 4 is tough. The thing I always point to is also you can have good ones, but the issue is you're probably going to lose your ones over the course of a long season. And when you have your backup left guard in, which I don't think Boise State did, but you know what I mean? Like when your guys are worn down, do you have someone else you can put in there? By the way, I would argue in some ways that because of some preseason injuries, Oregon was in that boat, right? Like they were also a team that was really good along the ones on the offensive and defensive line. And defensive line kind of got together, but their offensive line, like they had to put some guys out there who they probably would have rather not played if their transfers and some of their health guys had come through. This is just what happens at Boise State when you're playing a defense like Penn State. Now, I think that there were more favorable matchups that maybe they could have matched up a little better with. I mean, Oregon, I think, is one of them. We got to see that early in the year. But Penn State is a team that can just erase your offensive line when they're playing at a high level on the defensive line. And that's what happened. I also do want to give a shout out to Maddox Madsen, though, the Boise State quarterback. He was balling out there. And I want to be clear too, like you talked about, Penn State was very clear. We are not letting Ashton Jeanty beat us. We will put 8 in the box every single play if we have to. We do not care. So some of that credit does go to Jeanty for the way that they defended him. But Maddox Madsen took full advantage of it. And he was actually the first quarterback all season to throw for 300 yards against Penn State. Nobody else had done it. And they played Ohio State earlier this season as well. The last quarterback to do it, because actually over the last 2 years, the only quarterback who threw for 300 yards against Penn State was Jackson Dart in the bowl game last year for Ole Miss. So, that's pretty good company when you're talking about Ole Miss's passing offense going with Boise State's. I thought the defense also battled really, really well for them. And, look, this was always a long shot, right? This was always going to be a little bit of a Cinderella, even though they did move up to the 3 seed, just because of some of the matchup stuff when you talk about the bracket that they got. But, it was a really good game. The final score was 31-14, but I don't think that expresses just how close this game was. Boise State had a field goal in the fourth quarter that would have cut it to 7 points, and they just couldn't get it to go. So really fun game. I do wish we got to see a little bit more of the best of Ashton Jeanty, though.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk about it in the next episode, but teams like Boise State and especially like SMU, Indiana, are going to really probably get a bounce from this. Because, again, that Boise State defense got 4 sacks, 7 TFLs, but that Penn State running attack was just hard to stop, and we'll probably talk about that more when we come back for the second half. But before we do, let's just really quickly touch on the game that just happened, the Sugar Bowl. Notre Dame and Georgia was a defensive battle we kind of expected. A good amount of people still showed up. I believe official attendance was still like 57,000. But I just have to say, again, I don't want to say this is still these guys all want to win. But again, just like I said for James Franklin, Marcus Freeman going into this season, especially after the NIU loss, everyone was like, this is the third year. This is when the Notre Dame head coach is supposed to blah, 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 win a national championship, get to the national championship, look good. Okay. If we were still in the 14 playoff, he's won 2 games, he would have won it. All right. So I don't know. I feel bad about moving the goalposts on him a little bit. Like, you got to win 2 more, buddy. You got to win 2 more. I mean, like, okay, no.
Welcome to 2024, man. Or 2025, I guess.
And this is the first time in history Notre Dame's ever had 13 wins. That's bonkers, when you think about it. Granted, we keep adding games to the season, but still. It's Notre Dame, dang it. So I just wanted to point that it's a first major bowl win for them since 1994. Were you born yet?
That was the year I was born.
Dang it. Wow. Okay. All right. Every episode, there's that moment where the chill of death kind of goes through our age, kind of creeps in and taps me on the shoulder. I know. I'll be there later. Just leave me alone. Give me a couple of decades more at least. Anyway. But, Notre Dame did what they needed to do, man. They played that defense. They held Georgia 2 for 12 on third down, 0 for 4 on fourth downs. And then Georgia just couldn't, they scored, 10 points in 4 trips to, pass the 35 on the Notre Dame side of the ball. They found that edge in the kicking game. And Riley Leonard does his style of play, man. He only threw for 90, but he ran for 80, and he just made the plays when he needed to. I mean, I just have to give credit. Psyching out the Georgia defense into an offside.
That was crazy. That does not happen against Georgia. That does not happen. Like Marcus Freeman coached his way around Kirby Smart. That never happens. Kirby Smart is one of the best in-game coaches of his generation. And that play was insane. I don't know if he's been asked about it yet, so I don't know if there's a quote circling as yet, whether he explained it. What it seemed like that the Notre Dame offensive line also decided to go half a count behind the snap. Somebody had pointed that out on Twitter, that they had their usual snap cadence, and they were going to snap the ball. They weren't just going to let it run out. They weren't just trying to bait him. But it didn't happen right at the moment that Georgia thought that it would. They tried to jump the count, and Notre Dame didn't snap it. And then they snapped it immediately after. They got a shot down the sideline, and it was for a first down. That was insane. That was one of the it's so rare to see something new like that in college football, because everything's been done before. I remember the last time that I guess somebody took advantage of a rule like that. And it was back in 2018 when I was first starting at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. People might remember the North Texas-Arkansas game where you have the guy do the fake fair catch where he just takes the ball like he's fair catching it, didn't actually wave his arm, runs for a touchdown and an upset victory. That was the last time that I remember being like, whoa, you can do that? And that's what it felt like here today. And look, I think that Notre Dame also certainly had some shortcomings in this game. When you talk about it, they scored 23 points, but gosh, they scored 1 touchdown, and it was on it was an 11-yard pass because of a turnover. That's a little concerning to me. But the other piece too is that Georgia's been a little susceptible on the back end of the defense, and Notre Dame's just not a team that's going to take advantage of that. But where we did start to see them take advantage of it a little bit was when they got the perimeter running game going and started to get in space against the Georgia secondary with their running backs. That's when I think you started to see a little bit more success. But I mean, just big picture, to step back. Notre Dame has been defined in the New Year's 6 BCS CFP era by not being able to hang with elite talent. And while Georgia, I would argue, is not really that close to being as good as they were in 21-22 and even in 23, they're the number 2 talent team in the country. And Notre Dame at no moment was getting out-athleted. At no moment were they getting out-physicaled. And that credit goes to Marcus Freeman. I remember when I first started again at CBS, we would write commit articles for some of the top guys whenever they would commit on our network. And you started to see some of these names show up. Drake Bowen was one that I wrote. Jalen Sneed was one that, like, these guys who have just been around. Bryce Young, the defensive end, who, by the way, had 2 hilarious running into the punter calls on the first drive of the game. But, like, these guys are showing up and showing out in so many ways. So sometimes when your defense is good enough, you just need to do enough offensively. And Notre Dame did it. They ran out the clock. Riley Leonard has been what they've needed, nothing more, nothing less. And, man, Notre Dame beat Georgia by 2 touchdowns.
Absolutely. Well, when we get back from the break, we're going to break down the 2 semifinals here on the College Football Survivor Show. So, yeah, these were some fun quarterfinals, and now we have a pair of semifinals. Now, yes, it's blue bloods top to bottom. I mean, we'll Penn State, you're more or less a blue blood. We'll give you that. So we're going to get – but yet, I don't know why. It's more there were years where this would have kind of made me roll my eyes. Like, there's just nothing changes. And we had that, especially got a little stale there, in the 14 playoff for a while there. And it got exciting the last 2, but it felt like it was getting a little mundane and maybe even losing some of the casual fans of it. But now, because there was a 12-team playoff, because all of these teams had to play twice. Like, again, no one who got a bye made it through. These are teams that all feel like they've earned their spot to some extent or another. Now, you can say some had a tougher path than another. That's true, but now they get to square off against each other. We get Ohio State and Texas in the Cotton Bowl Classic. We get the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, and Penn State. By the way, I still have to say, one of the jokes, I can't get enough of it. If James Franklin wins the game, was it truly a big game? Well, now I think we can call this one a big game. I don't know what we're going to have to take. He's going to win it. If he wins the national championship, I almost want to try and get that question in. Does this mean that you won the big game? Oh, my goodness. But anyways, all of that said, these are a pair of exciting ones. Gosh, which one do we want to start with?
Well, let me just throw one more stat at you, which is that this is kind of crazy to think about because, like you said, 4 very recognizable programs in college football. None of them have won a national championship since 2014. And 2 of the 4 teams have not won a national championship in the BCS or college football playoff era.
True.
Right? That's how far you have to go back. I think that for Notre Dame, I want to say it's 1988 was their last national championship. For Penn State, I think you're talking about 1986. I might be a little off on that. I can't
remember if how close Notre Dame got in 93. That's the only thing I'm trying to remember. I can't remember. Was it 93? I'm going to look that up as you talk. Don't worry about it. But
yeah. But no, the last one that's credited to them is 1988.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And this is just claim national. I mean, obviously, look, we can get into all of the.
Oh, they were the number 2 in 93. That's what I'm messing up. Like that was the nightmare of the bowl era. They they win the Cotton Bowl and they're number 2. I mean? Like,
so I was right. Penn State, they claimed 2 in 82 and 86.
Yeah, they got those.
For Notre Dame, obviously they've won 11, but none since 1988. And Ohio State, they have the one in 2014 and the one in 2002. Before that, it was 1972. So, like, for all the success, they have not had a ton of actual championships in the modern era. And Texas has one post-integration in 2005. That's it. That's the only one. So, like, these are teams that have been competitive year over year, but they haven't actually won national championships. We ran into this situation last year, too, by the way, when Michigan played Washington. Both teams that had won national championships, but neither had done it recently at all. A dynamic, too, that I want to just keep a little bit of an eye on as well, that we talked about last year, was kind of the rise of the North. We had a North-on-North national championship game in 2023. If Ohio State beats Texas, which let's preview that one first, we're going to have a North-on-North again because both teams on the opposite side of the bracket are from the North, Notre Dame versus Penn State. We might even have another, at least current, Washington wasn't in the Big Ten last year, but they were heading to the Big Ten. We might have another Big Ten on Big Ten national title game for the second year in a row. It's really crazy to think about just how this has changed. I mean, I have so many theories for it. It's hard to know how many of them are real, or that we. Again, I think that the fact that now there's open pay for play, I think that kind of shifts the balance of power to where things used to be a little bit more under the table. I think that Big Ten programs are a little bit more developmental than SEC, where there's a little bit more desire for quick results. Anyway, that's a whole conversation for another day that I'm sure we can have all off season, really across media. But I want to start with this Texas Ohio State game. Well, first of all, we'll be in attendance at the game, but two, I'm really worried for Texas, man. I am really, really worried for Texas, because I think they're going to be able to do. I'm not even going to say I think. I know they're going to be able to do more defensively than what Oregon and Tennessee did. Tennessee had a really great defensive line, had some great linebackers that kind of struggled in some big moments, and had some good secondary players, but not elite ones. Texas has elite playmakers at every level of the defense. Jahdae Barron at nickelback won the Thorpe Award as the best in college football. Malik Muhammad, who's kind of the off guy, like, he's really talented. He's still growing. Like, he's not a perfect player yet, but he's really, really talented. At safety, Andrew Makuba was a multi-year starter for Clemson. Michael Taff, a former walk-on, one of the most underrated players in the entire country. Actually, I don't even know if that's true anymore. He was named an All-American, actually, by the AP. So maybe perception's finally catching up. And then their defensive line is incredibly talented as well. So it's not going to be as easy for Ohio State, the way that it was against Oregon and was against Tennessee. My issue in this game, who scores points for Texas? Like, who is exactly the guy? And this isn't a Quinn Ewers conversation, because I don't think this is his fault. Like, Texas is going to run for 0 yards. Like, they're going to not be able to run the football at all. What do you do about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is going to be the problem again with such an exciting game in the Peach Bowl. They basically showed all of their flaws to their next opponent. And unfortunately, their next opponent is an Ohio State team that is so loaded on defense that they're probably licking their chops at the opportunities they're going to get to play them. And again, I don't think I think Ohio State is in a zone that is terrifying right now. They had their down games already. They're done with that. They are here to murder, kill everything in their path and just prove it. And again, let's just talk about how bookended that would be. The last national championship was the first in the 14 playoff. They would just love to be the first in the 12-team playoff. Like, hey, welcome. We're going to inaugurate this new college football playoff. And here's the thing too. I mean, I was thinking about it with the Peach Bowl. I'm like, imagine if we didn't have this nonsense of how the teams got slotted into the quarterfinals. Imagine if there was a true home field advantage. Because if it had been in the Fiesta Bowl, I am convinced Arizona State might have had that slight edge that would have made it even harder on Texas.
Maybe.
Maybe. We don't know. But sure, fine. This is going to be a home game for Texas. I actually think that price is going to be really high, which I know the media loves to say that term now, like it's become fashionable. But thank goodness too. I'm really worried about making sure that the parking attendants get their pay. I want to make sure that the concessions are super expensive. That's really what's important to me as a fan of college football. I want to know it's a really high price. That makes me feel so much better about college football. I actually think I figured out the best way for Texas to try to win this game against Ohio State. It's to infiltrate the Ohio State coaching staff and say, are we really sure that actually this is what I'll do. If I'm Steve Sarkisian, I'll be like, I don't think Ohio State can run on us the way that Arizona State did. I don't know. Like, I just don't see them as being that kind of team. I just don't think that they're as good, at running back up front as Arizona State is. Like, I'd hate to see Ohio State try to run the ball at us over and over again instead of passing the ball to the best receivers in the history of college football. I would, I would just hate to see that, because I don't know. They just probably can't do it. But seriously, that's not going to happen. They are going to be able to make stuff happen on the back end. Again, I do expect that the Ohio State pass game will have more miscues. I expect an interception at least in this game. I expect some 3 and outs in this game.
But I just put a lot of faith into the Ohio State defense, which I think that these are the two best defenses in college football this year, by the way. Ohio State, I would have 1, probably Texas 2. If you flip them, I would not be mad about it. I think that both of them are that good. And, I mean, the biggest factor for me, well, I guess the two biggest factors. One is Jeremiah Smith, who has 100-yard performances in both of the first 2 games. I think the fact that they're just leading on him is perfect. The other thing, too, though, is Jack Sawyer is arguably the breakout player for Ohio State in this latter half of the season. He has been unbelievable in the college football playoff. 3.5 sacks in the past 2 games. He was a top 5 player in his recruiting class when he came out and has never lived up to the hype at that level. Well, I think that he's taken it personally. What's happened, all the conversation around Ryan Day, all the talk around Ohio State's shortcomings. He even, by the way, had that interception in the Ohio State-Michigan game. That should have been the game-winning play, but it wasn't because Ohio State blew it. So I think that he takes this very personally. I think that he's been one of the emotional leaders to help bring that edge for this team. And if Ohio State has finally figured out that pass rushing position, watch out, because this Texas offensive line is really, really struggling. They're so good. But this was a unit that was considered the best in the country for the entire season. They missed their starting right tackle, Cam Williams, for the last game. He should be back, I would imagine, for this next game, but you just don't know. Calvin Banks is a little banged up. I mean, if Ohio State is able to win that battle up front consistently, I just don't know how Texas scores enough points to even have a chance in this game.
I'm almost thinking, imagine had Ohio State beaten Michigan and gone into the Big Ten championship game. How would I'm sorry, I don't know why I went back to it, but I'm like, how would that have changed the dynamic in that game versus beating each other in the play? I'm still curious, what happened? They're I don't really care about books about seasons, but that's actually a book I want to see. I want to hear that, Chip Kelly just went up to Ryan Day after that game and said, will you just trust me now for the rest of the season or something like that? And then we see that was the other thing too. You hired Chip Kelly. What's happening here? I'm convinced that's what something like that happened, because this is unreal. And yeah, I completely expect, I expect that they have swallowed whatever stupid pride or whatever. I don't even know what you call it.
I don't know what it is.
That you're going to try and beat somebody like that, and they're going to adapt, figure it out. And if they don't come out as furiously as they have the last 2 games, they're going to make some adjustments and absolutely go, wild on the Texans. Pardon me, on the Texans, sorry, on the Longhorns in the next in the second half. But I want us to also let's move on to the Orange Bowl, because this is an intriguing one too. First of all, again, these are the 2 teams that are the historically powerful teams. But again, as we pointed out, they haven't won national championships since the 80s. It's funny, they're tied in their series. They're 9-9-1. They haven't played in about almost 20 years. We've mentioned there's injuries all around. I mean, speaking of Abdul Carter, I don't know if you all saw, there was that tweet he did, because his status is uncertain for the Orange Bowl, so he tweeted Darth Vader in a healing chamber, kind of hinting that he was going to try
in a back to tank. Come on, have some respect.
Oh my gosh, dude! All right, I am old enough to have been alive when the last the original trilogy. All right, sorry, folks. I'm old enough that I literally said the last Star Wars movie, as though there haven't been 30 since then. But I was old enough to see Jedi in theaters. But anyway. I'm curious to see how this is going to work out. As much as I was impressed that Notre Dame put together the defensive performance they did, I think again, not to reduce the victory, but you have to put a little asterisk on Carson Beck being out of that game. Gunnar Stockton did his best, but it's still not the person that they had leading their team the whole time. Drew Aller, I'm not saying he should have been a Heisman candidate or anything like that, but he put together some key plays when they needed it against Boise State. He's proven he can be that quarterback they need right now. And then more importantly, you've got Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, who I think are going to really make it hard for that Notre Dame defense to put up the same kind of performance they did against Georgia. And I think they're going to score. They are going to score. And that is going to be a problem that I don't think Notre Dame necessarily has the because they're going to be facing another good defense. I don't know if Notre Dame has the offensive firepower to keep up with Penn State in this game. It's wild. Going into this one, we've talked about this before. We both kind of penciled Notre Dame as getting all the way to the championship and either getting killed by Ohio State, or in my case, I thought Oregon, which clearly was wrong. I'm now actually thinking like this is going to probably end up being a joke I made ages ago, seemingly, which was it's going to be Ohio State versus Penn State. This could have been an email part 3 of, this. We're going to see the same Ohio State Penn State game we always see, to the horror of everyone in the Big Ten and to the horror of the national audience and to the bemusement of the Big Ten audience that's watching that game.
Well, I do think, let me actually back up. I picked Notre Dame to make the national title game against Ohio State. And I actually picked Penn State to get upset in the first round. Now, look, there's an aspect of like, come on, guys. Like, are we really just going to pick all the good teams? Like, come on. Obviously, there was an aspect of that. I was like, who could be a Cinderella? I kind of thought that SMU would do what Arizona State actually did. Like, I thought that it would look a little more like that. I knew somebody was going to do it, but, I just picked wrong. I'll live. But now heading into this matchup, I just don't love where Notre Dame's offense is at when you're comparing it to Penn State. I think that these defenses, I'd probably give Notre Dame a slight edge, but they're comparable. They're very comparable. Both top 5 type units, if not better. I think that where I do have a little more confidence, especially, by the way, another thing to note is that Notre Dame's Jeremiah Love went out with a knee injury during this game. Notre Dame was just so banged up. They're just so banged up. They lost, of course, multiple offensive linemen over the course of the season. Charles Jagusa was supposed to be their starting left tackle before the season. He gets hurt. I believe it's Ashton Craig is the center who got hurt against Purdue. They've lost 3 defensive linemen in Boubacar Traore and Riley Mills, of course, who led them in sacks this year from the defensive tackle position, in Jordan Botella, who also was lost against Purdue. I mean, that's 5 linemen who would have started for you. It's just so much. It's just so much talent to lose over the course of a college football playoff run. And when you look at Penn State, of course, we're going to be waiting to see whether Abdul Carter is fully ready to go, and I think he is the kind of player who can swing this game. But Penn State, on both sides, I think, is just peaking right now. And the irony of this is that we talked a lot about how Penn State was the perfect team that the system was built for. The type who really cannot compete, most likely, with Ohio State, but is probably better than everybody else. And it's kind of working out that way. Yeah. And certainly, I think, even though they've had the favorable path, I mean, they've also benefited from the fact that the top of everybody else is not where Ohio State is right now, right? Like, Georgia isn't that level right now. I don't think Notre Dame is as good as Ohio State or Michigan over the past couple of years, for example. So there's real opportunity here for Penn State if they take advantage of it. I think I'm actually leaning more towards Penn State in this game, because I think that they're just going to find more ways to generate points. Now, they have flaws. I think they have some issues if they go up against Ohio State. Like you said, maybe this game could have been an emo kind of matchup. But against Notre Dame, I do think that Tyler Warren at tight end, I think that the way right now that Drew Aller is playing and going downfield is pretty significant. I mean, I think that gives you something to build on in the passing game. For me to feel confident that Penn State wins, I need to see some explosiveness in the wide receiver passing game, not just in the Tyler Warren passing game. I need to see Omari Evans get downfield, for example, right? Like, I need to see Harrison Wallace get downfield. But if that happens once or twice over the course of the matchup, which, again, I think is possible. I think Georgia exposed some holes at times. This is a running game that can lean on people. I think that they're really lucky in so many ways to have that thunder and lightning duo of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. they've managed those two backs perfectly over the course of this season. I think that Katron Allen needs to be the every down back, and Nick Singleton is kind of the spark plug to throw in there. And we saw that in the win over Boise State. They also need to make fewer mistakes than they did against Boise State. I don't think that the Penn State team that played against Boise State was their best. I need to see closer to their best, especially on offense, going against this Notre Dame defense. So I picked Notre Dame to literally make the title game heading into the playoff, and we're that close, but I don't know. I just feel a little better right now about Penn State.
It's certainly a closer matchup in my mind than the Cotton Bowl. But at this point, I don't know. I just think Penn State's going to have that edge, and it'll be really exciting to see if we end up, because again, not counting out Texas. I'm not counting out Texas after what happened to Oregon. Like, any team could just suddenly we forgot to show up, despite all our talents. And I'm fascinated to see the idea that there is the possibility that, we're definitely going to have one Northern team there, but we could have two Northern teams, or especially a Big Ten on Big Ten game, because that's going to really, I don't know what it'll take to shift some of the narrative about who the dominant conference is in college football at the moment, but I don't know what more you can say at that point. We saw what Illinois did to South Carolina. We saw that Michigan did to Alabama. As we're recording this, it looks like Ole Miss is doing what we expected to do. But Duke isn't actually the same.
You mean Duke's third string quarterback wasn't up for the challenge? That's just, oh my gosh, that sucks.
Yeah.
That is just so yeah.
Oh, well, at least we'll give Lane something to tweet about. Oh my goodness. Well, these are some exciting semifinals after I thought an excellent. Three really good games in the Rose Bowl, which was also kind of intriguing, but for the wrong reasons for the Ducks. It was kind of like the horror. We were expecting one blowout, not that one, and not in that way, and we were all just kind of looking in kind of, like a horror show that we had to watch and couldn't take our eyes off of. But I think we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. I wanted to thank all of you for listening out there. Thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. And we just, again, he's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at cbssports.com. That's Shehan Jayaraja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hairy, part of the group that runs RCFB, the college football community on Reddit. Thanks for listening, everybody.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.